graphic is showing how life expectancy was revised down by the Office of National Statistics again and again after 2012. We had an austerity programme brought in by the 2010 coalition government of making cuts, and that austerity programme, which reduced spending on health, which reduced benefits, which resulted on Meals on Wheels not being funded by local councils, so that food didn't arrive to bedridden people, which resulted in local rural bus services being cut. That austerity crisis coincided with the first flatlining of life expectancy since the 1930s. It's not coincidence. The government tried repeatedly to claim it was influenza, flu. You don't have a special kind of flu that only hits Britain. Right? Viruses do not know international borders. At the very end, you can see the effect of the COVID pandemic. It's that little dip down in life expectancy. Not little, obviously, quite a large pandemic, but in terms of effect on life expectancy, not as big as the cuts that we had. Now, you might have said, well, we had to do the cuts. We had a banking crisis in 2008. We ran out of money. There was no alternative. But nobody who made those decisions thought that we were going to get this occurring. Although possibly some of them, possibly some thought, well, if we got a younger population, I don't know. There's our gaps. We have the largest geographical gaps in life expectancy in Europe. The largest gaps used to be in Germany between what was the Eastern Land of the old East Germany and the West. But Germany levelled up. And so the life expectancy gaps in Germany are now indistinguishable from other large European countries. We have these very, very big inequalities. We got to one point in Kensington and Chelsea, in the richer part of Kensington and Chelsea, where life expectancy was rising by more than a year. And I like these statistics because when life expectancy goes up, say, from 81 to 82.5 to 84 in 2 years, there are only two possibilities. Either the residents of Kensington and Chelsea are going to become gods and be immortal, and it becomes Mount Olympus, or you're living through very unusual times. And the answer was very unusual times. The poor were having to leave the area, very rich people from outside were coming in, the population was changing. And changing at a rate that it's very, very hard to carry on with. It won't carry on like that. This is me being sarcastic, so I'll slip over that one. Public spending, last complicated graph. And then I've got about 10 points and then we'll stop for questions. But I think this may be the most important piece of information to give you. These figures are from the International Monetary Fund. They're about the percent of GDP spent on public spending. Public spending is health, schools, welfare benefits, state pensions far more, social services, the military, anything the government spends money on, all put together. And the height of these lines at any point in time is how much is the government spending. It's almost the same as taxation, give or take a bit of borrowing. So if you like, this shows you how much these countries are taxing as well as spending. And you might often hear that rates of taxation in the UK are at a 70-year high. And that's true. That red line, ignore the last 4 or 5 years, their estimates, but the red line is generally higher now than it has been in the past. So taxation in the UK is high compared to the past. But it's lower than everywhere else in Europe. All those other countries are taxing and spending far, far more. And I could say to you, well, go and look at Belgium or France or Finland or Norway and Denmark, and there you will see a wasteland of what happens if government taxes high and spends highly. And it is worth going to see other parts of Europe and just how different they are. The two spikes in the graph are the 2008 banking crisis, where every country had to bail out the banks, that's public spending. And then the 2020 pandemic public sector spending. So those are what the rises are. But there's this huge variation in what is possible. There are only two countries in that graph which spent less and taxed less than the UK. If you're very quick at looking, you can see way back in the 80s where they were. They're Spain, shortly after Franco, the dictator, was in charge, and Greece, not too long after the generals were in charge, the junta. Right? It's only non-democratic countries that tend to tax and spend less. Because, of course, when you've got a democracy, most people are going to vote for political parties that are going to do things that make your life better, which is what taxing and spending is about. Taxing is about collecting money from everybody to spend in a way that you've agreed collectively to do. It's quite efficient. It's much more efficient than the spending of very rich people, which tends to be on things they don't need, like yachts, or second or third or fourth houses, or art. It's not as efficient as the spending of poor people, who spend much, much more carefully than government because they don't have very much money and they might be hungry. But in the middle, if you want a good health service, you'll get a better one if it's provided by the state, which is why the health services of Europe do so much better than the health services of America. Even the richest 1% of people in America live no longer than the richest 1% in the UK. If you want a good housing system, between a third and a half of it will be provided by the state or underwritten or controlled by the state in some way. And if you want a good education system, it is impossible to get it without the state being involved at a very, very high level. So I labour this graph because we have these geographical inequalities between European countries. So you don't have to have a debate where you argue with each other what might happen if you taxed and spent more or less. You can go and geographically see it, and you can look at the outcomes of what happens. Here's where the UK sits in the ranking of OECD countries by income inequality. This is the Gini measure. It doesn't matter what measure you use, they all roughly show you the same. Most unequal OECD countries are South Africa, Costa Rica, Chile, Mexico, Bulgaria, Turkey, United States, and there we are, United Kingdom. Okay, we're a European outlier. Right, the gap between people like me, I'm way up near the top of the 10%, just on the edge of the 1%. I grew up in the 1%, just on the bottom. Same position as Sunak. And 90% of the population is much wider than in a normal country. Skip over a load of smaller countries and you get to Italy, skip over Australia and you get to Spain, skip over a whole load more and you get Germany and France, and only 4 countries separate Germany and France from Finland. These data are a few years out of date. The most recent data shows 5 countries in Europe are more equal than the Nordic 5, and 5 countries, including France and Germany, are almost as equal as the Nordic 5. Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. There are 15 countries at the centre of Europe which are Nordic now. That's some of the lowest inequality gaps seen in history of the world. Huge block of population. On the edge of those 15 countries are the outliers. Russia, with Moscow, enormous inequalities. Turkey with Istanbul, enormous inequalities. Both have quite dictatorial leadership, and the United Kingdom and London. There are historical reasons why these countries on the edge are strange. Moscow was the centre of an empire, the Soviet Union. Istanbul, which used to be Constantinople, was the centre of the Ottoman Empire. And if you wonder why London is so large, it's because it was the centre of the largest empire the world had ever known. And there are many, many things in England and in the UK which exist as they do because of a relic of what the situation was a century ago. A century ago, we were still the heart of the largest empire the world had ever known.